After years of searching, Lucy found herself asking this question again, this time not with desperation, but quiet reflection. She had read all the advice columns, watched the romantic comedies, even downloaded the dating apps that promise soulmates in just a few swipes. Still, something always felt off. One evening, while walking alone through a quiet park, she realized she had been looking outward for something that might begin within. So she started small. She picked up journaling, trying to understand herself better. She joined a local book club not for the promise of meeting someone, but to connect with people over shared passions. She took up painting again, a hobby she'd long abandoned, and let her creativity flow without judgment. She traveled solo for the first time and discovered not only new places, but a deeper confidence she never knew she had. In focusing on self-improvement, Lucy noticed something beautiful. She began attracting people who were drawn to her authenticity. Her conversations became deeper, her friendships more meaningful. And slowly, love didn't seem like a destination to chase, but something growing naturally from the life she was building. Months passed, and Lucy and James found their connection deepening in the quiet, everyday moments. They didn't need grand gestures to prove their love. It was in the way James always remembered to bring her a cup of chamomile tea when she worked late into the night, or how Lucy would slip handwritten notes into his backpack before a long day. But love, real love, doesn't mean the absence of challenges. When Lucy received a job offer in another city, a huge step up in her career excitement quickly gave way to anxiety. She sat across from James at their favorite diner, her fingers nervously tracing the rim of her coffee cup. "I don't want to leave," she whispered, "but I can't pass this up." James looked at her, a soft smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "Then we'll figure it out. Love doesn't always mean staying in the same place, it means growing together, even if that growth looks different for a while." They spent the next few weeks in long, heartfelt conversations. They talked about priorities, fears, possibilities. They made a plan. Lucy would take the job and move, and they'd try long distance at least for a while. It wasn't easy. There were late-night phone calls, missed moments, and the ache of wanting to be close but not being able to. But they kept showing up. They supported each other's goals and found comfort in knowing their love was strong enough to stretch across city lines. After a year, James made the leap. He found a remote role and moved to join Lucy. Their reunion wasn't cinematic, it was quiet, messy, and beautiful. Boxes everywhere, takeout on the floor, and a feeling that despite all the uncertainty, they were home. They didn't rush into the next steps. Love, they knew, wasn't a race. But one sunny morning, while cooking pancakes and dancing barefoot in the kitchen, James looked at Lucy and said, "You know, if this is what forever looks like, I'm in." They were curled up on the couch, a storm tapping gently at the windows, the scent of rain and old books filling the air. Lucy was half asleep, her head resting on James's chest when he said, "Do you ever think about the future? About us building something more?" She lifted her head and met his eyes. "All the time." There was no rush, no deadline. They talked for months about marriage, about whether they even needed it, about kids and what kind of parents they might be, about fears of becoming like their parents, and how they'd try to break those cycles. They both wanted a future together. Just had to feel right. One autumn morning, they visited the botanical gardens, Lucy's favorite spot in the city. Leaves drifted around them like confetti from the trees. James pulled her gently into a secluded path, reached into his coat pocket, and handed her a folded piece of paper. Not a ring. Not yet. Just a note. "If you're still in, so am I. Let's keep choosing each other. Every day. Forever if we can." Tears welled up in Lucy's eyes. She laughed and said, "Then let's do it. But we're writing our own vows, and there's going to be pie instead of cake." They were married the following spring in a tiny greenhouse surrounded by their closest people, under strings of fairy lights and the scent of lavender. The ceremony was simple, heartfelt, and full of laughter. No one walked down aisles. They met each other halfway. Years passed. They traveled. They adopted a scrappy dog with one floppy ear named Theo. They had quiet Sunday mornings, loud game nights with friends, and arguments that always ended in deeper understanding. When they eventually welcomed their first child, a wide-eyed baby girl named Isla, they weren't sure what they were doing. But they knew they'd figure it out together, just like they always had. She was curious, wild-hearted, and fearless, a whirlwind of energy with scraped knees and a love for stars. At 5, she asked if the moon had feelings. At 7, she wanted to be an astronaut. By 10, she was building solar systems out of papier-mâché and asking complicated questions about the world. James and Lucy encouraged it all. They created space for wonder even when life got messy. And it did get messy. When Lucy's mother got sick, things shifted. Lucy spent weekends traveling to her childhood town, juggling hospital visits, calls with doctors, and the ache of watching someone she loved fade. James held everything down at home. He packed lunches, attended school plays, and never once made her feel like she was handling it alone. But grief has a way of finding cracks. One night, after a particularly hard call, Lucy snapped over something small: laundry left unfolded. The sink full again. James snapped back. They raised their voices for the first time in years. Isla peeked out from her bedroom door, wide-eyed and silent. It was a wake-up call. Later that night, after Isla had gone to bed, they sat on the floor of the kitchen, still in silence. No one apologized right away. Instead, Lucy leaned her head on James's shoulder and whispered, "I don't know how to carry all of this." He took her hand, fingers laced together. "Then let me carry some of it with you." They learned again how love wasn't about perfection. It was about the ability to return to each other after the storms. To keep choosing kindness, even when exhausted. To ask for help. To listen. Years later, Isla, then a teenager, asked them how they stayed so close. Lucy smiled and said, "We never stopped being on the same team." James added, "And we never pretended it was easy. We just decided it was worth it." As Isla entered her teenage years, everything started to shift again. The once chatty little girl now rolled her eyes and disappeared into her room with music blaring through her headphones. She challenged everything: curfews, rules, opinions, and pushed back with all the force of a girl trying to figure out who she was. Lucy and James weren't perfect parents. They stumbled, argued behind closed doors about how to handle things, and sometimes got it wrong. But they kept showing up. They went to every band recital, even when Isla pretended she didn't care. James kept a tradition of taking her out for milkshakes after her exams, no matter the grade. Lucy started writing letters to her daughter, ones she tucked into notebooks or coat pockets, reminders that she was loved even in the hard moments. Then came the heartbreak. At 17, Isla had her first real love and her first real loss. She came home one night with red-rimmed eyes and no words, collapsing onto the couch in tears. Lucy sat beside her and simply held her, stroking her hair the way she had when Isla was a baby. "I don't know how it hurts this much," Isla whispered. "You gave someone a piece of your heart," Lucy said. "That's always going to hurt. But it means you're alive. It means you're brave." Later, James made her tea and said, "Heartbreak sucks, but it's not the end of your story. Trust me." Isla eventually found her way studying art history, traveling, making mistakes, and calling home more often than she expected to. And every time she did, Lucy and James were there, no matter where they were or what they were doing. Years passed, and the house that once echoed with music and teenage drama slowly quieted. James retired first, then Lucy. They bought a little cottage by the sea, not to escape, but to begin again. Mornings were slower now. They walked hand in hand along the shore, talked about books they never had time to read before, and cooked dinners with no rush. There were still disagreements. James snored. Lucy talked to the plants too much, but their love had softened into something steady and deep. One evening, as they watched the sunset from their porch, Lucy leaned into James and said, "I think we built a good life." James kissed her temple. "I think we're still building it." She was focused, determined to build a career curating museums, to travel, to stand on her own. Love was a thing for later. But then came Leo. He was nothing like what she thought she wanted: messy, late to everything, always quoting poetry and sketching strangers on napkins. But he made her laugh. Really laugh. He listened like it was an art. And when she talked about sculpture and the forgotten corners of history, he didn't glaze over, he leaned in. Still, Isla resisted. She kept love at arm's length, afraid of losing herself. Afraid, maybe, of not being enough. Until one night, after a fight over something trivial, he showed up at her apartment in the rain, drenched and breathless. "I know you're scared," he said, standing in the doorway. "But I'm not asking you to lose yourself. I'm asking you to share the world you've built. Let me be part of it." She let him in. It wasn't perfect, no love is, but it was real. They grew together, slowly, learning how to hold space for each other's dreams. When Isla got her first museum job in a small coastal town, they packed up and went. Leo started teaching art at a community center, and their days were filled with messy paint, quiet mornings, and long walks by the sea. One day, while unpacking a box of old photo albums, Isla came across a picture of her parents, young, windswept, standing in front of the greenhouse where they got married. She smiled. Later that week, Isla and Leo walked to that same greenhouse. It was still there, still strung with fairy lights. They didn't plan a big wedding. Just a few close friends, her parents beaming in the front row, and a promise whispered under the vines. And when Lucy pulled her daughter into a hug afterward, she whispered, "You found someone who brings you back to yourself. That's all I ever hoped for you." Isla and Leo built a life that was theirs, filled with quiet passion, paint-splattered walls, and a steady kind of joy. Their home, tucked just a few blocks from the shore, echoed with laughter, music, and the smell of fresh bread and sea salt. Then came Juniper. Their daughter arrived one spring morning, wild-haired and fierce-eyed, letting out a cry that seemed to shake the whole world awake. From the moment she was placed in Isla's arms, something deep inside her shifted. Not just love though, yes, that too, but a fierce, protective awe. Knowing. "I get it now," she said softly to Leo, tears slipping down her cheeks. "I get what my parents were holding all those years." Juniper grew like a vine toward sunlight, curious and bold, always asking why and what if. At 5, she tried to build a flying machine with cereal boxes and old shoelaces. At 7, she wrote letters to the moon. By 10, she was staging elaborate puppet shows in the backyard, charging the neighbors $1 per seat. Every summer, they visited Lucy and James at the cottage. It became a sacred tradition. Juniper would race down the dock, arms wide, hair flying in the breeze. James would meet her with a fishing net and a wink, while Lucy would have a plate of warm scones waiting. One golden summer evening, as the 4 generations sat around a fire pit, Juniper asleep in her mother's lap, Lucy looked around, her heart full. "You know," she said quietly, "we used to wonder what true love looked like. But maybe it looks like this. The whole story. Not just the beginnings but the middles. Mess. The growth. Choosing. Again and again." James took her hand. Isla leaned against Leo. And the fire crackled softly, warming their circle. Love had grown, rooted deep, reaching far. Not just a single story, but a legacy of choosing each other, of showing up, of growing into the light.